In the last 50 years there has been no apparent increase in personal happiness in Western nations, despite steadily growing economies in both Europe and their USA surveys have found no greater level of happiness since the 1950s, which seems strange since wealthier people generally claim to be happier than poorer people. In America, for example, more than a third of the richest group said they were very happy, while only half this number of the poorest made the same claim. Although it would be logical to expect that rising national wealth would lead to greater national happiness, this has not happened. Individually, more money does seem to increase happiness, but when everyone gets richer, no one appears to feel better. Economists have recently paid more attention to studying happiness, instead of the more traditional GDP per person. One suggestion has been that people rapidly get used to improvements, and therefore devalue them. Central heating is a good example, whereas 30 years ago it was a luxury item, today it is standard in nearly every home. South Korea is planning to move its capital from Seoul to a new site in the middle of the country. Although Seoul has been the capital since the 14th century, the city of over 20 million is now very crowded, and also close to the hostile armies of North Korea. The new capital is planned to cost $45 billion, with construction finishing by 2012. There is, however, strong opposition to the project, since similar schemes in other countries have taken far longer and cost much more than originally planned. Australia, for example, took over 70 years to finish building Canberra, while Nigeria has never completed its planned new capital, Abuja. Both Brazil and Malaysia have found that the building of new capitals, Brasilia and Putrajaya, can sharply increase the national burden of debt. Even if the government does eventually move to the new capital, it is unlikely that South Korea's main businesses will follow it, so Seoul will probably continue to be the country's principal city.
Most medical people despised the press, holding attitudes not totally unfamiliar today. Reporters tended to be suckers for every quack, half-quack, overeager scientist, or naive country doctor who thought he had a serum to cure tuberculosis, a herbal remedy for cancer, or a new surgical procedure to rejuvenate the aged. When the newspapers were not wasting space on undeserving medical stories, they were overplaying legitimate news, getting their facts wrong, and generally making a nuisance of themselves, interfering in the lives and practices of busy professionals. Doctors' deep suspicion of what they read in the newspapers and even in the less carefully edited of the medical journals, helps to explain some of the early skepticism about insulin in countries like Britain. "Oh, the Americans are always curing everything, this week it's diabetes." Even in Canada and the United States, it was some months before there was enough confirmation of the unlikely news from Toronto to convince wire services and the more skeptical doctors and editors that insulin was, indeed, the real thing.
Today, children love playing video games. In fact, children would sometimes skip meals and family outings just to spend time in front of the computers playing these games. The dangers of such games are many. For one, when children spend hours in front of the computer screens, nothing else matters. They lose interest in their studies. What becomes a priority is their game. They become addicted to the games and will become agitated if they do not get their daily fix. Moreover, when children spend so much time alone in their little virtual world, they have no interest in socializing with other children. This will lead to antisocial behavior. These games are expensive too. An original copy of the Counter-Strike game children these days are so fond of can easily cost $100 at least. Nevertheless, they are willing to spend their entire allowance on just one game. But all is not lost. There are many things parents can do to tackle this problem.
When Namibia gained independence in 1990, teenager Pascalina Flory was herding goats in the country's dry, desolate northern savanna. Her job, unpaid and dangerous, was to protect her parents' livestock from preying jackals and leopards. She saw wildlife as the enemy, and many of the other indigenous inhabitants of Namibia's rural communal lands shared her view. Wildlife poaching was commonplace. 15 years later, 31-year-old Pascalina's life and outlook are very different. She has built a previously undreamed-of career in tourism and is the first Black Namibian to be appointed the manager of a guest lodge. Her village and hundreds of others have directly benefited from government efforts to devolve wildlife management and tourism development on communal lands to conservancies run by indigenous peoples. Now we see the wildlife as our way of creating jobs and opportunities as the tourism industry grows, she also says. The future is better with wildlife around, not only for jobs but also for the environment. When Namibia gained independence in 1990, teenager Pascalina Flory was herding goats in the country's dry, desolate northern savanna. Her job, unpaid and dangerous, was to protect her parents' livestock from preying jackals and leopards. She saw wildlife as the enemy, and many of the other indigenous inhabitants of Namibia's rural communal lands shared her view. Wildlife poaching was commonplace. 15 years later, 31-year-old Pascalina's life and outlook are very different. She has built a previously undreamed-of career in tourism and is the first Black Namibian to be appointed the manager of a guest lodge. Her village and hundreds of others have directly benefited from government efforts to devolve wildlife management and tourism development on communal lands to conservancies run by indigenous peoples. Now we see the wildlife as our way of creating jobs and opportunities as the tourism industry grows, she also says. The future is better with wildlife around, not only for jobs but also for the environment of the background noise of your family life. Do you demonstrate by your own viewing that television should be watched selectively? Since television is clearly here to stay, it is important that parents manage their children's TV viewing so that it can be a plus rather than a minus in the family situation. Armed police have been brought into NSW schools to reduce crime rates and educate students. The 40 school liaison police, SLP, officers have been allocated to public and private high schools across the state. Organizers say the officers, who began work last week, will build positive relationships between police and students. But parent groups warned of potential dangers of armed police working at schools in communities where police relations were already under strain. Among their duties, the SLPs will conduct crime prevention workshops, talking to students about issues including shoplifting, offensive behavior, graffiti, and drugs, and alcohol. They can also advise school principals. One SLP, Constable Ben Purvis, began to work in the inner Sydney region last week, including at Alexandria Park Community School's senior campus. Previously stationed as a crime prevention officer at the Rocks, he now has 27 schools under his jurisdiction in areas including the Rocks, Redfern, and King's Cross. Constable Purvis said the full-time position would see him working on the broader issues of crime prevention. "I am not a security guard," he said. "I am not there to patrol the school. We want to improve relationships between police and school children to have a positive interaction. We are coming to the school and giving them the knowledge to improve their own safety." The use of fake ID among older students is among the issues he has already discussed with principals. Parents groups responded to the program positively, but said it may spark a range of community reactions. "It is a good thing and an innovative idea, and there could be some positive benefits," Council of Catholic School Parents Executive Officer Danielle Cronin said. Different communities will respond to this kind of presence in different ways. The coevolutionary relationship between cows and grass is one of nature's underappreciated wonders. It also happens to be the key to understanding just about everything about modern meat. For the grasses, which have evolved to withstand the grazing of ruminants, the cow maintains and expands their habitat by preventing trees and shrubs from gaining a foothold and hogging the sunlight. The animal also spreads grass seed, plants it with his hooves, and then fertilizes it with his manure. In exchange for these services, the grasses offer ruminants a plentiful and exclusive supply of lunch. For cows, like sheep, bison, and other ruminants, have evolved the special ability to convert grass, which single-stomached creatures like us can't digest, into high-quality protein. They can do this because they possess what is surely the most highly evolved digestive organ in nature, the rumen. About the size of a medicine ball, the organ is essentially a 45-gallon fermentation tank in which a resident population of bacteria dines on grass. Living their unseen lives at the far end of the food chain that culminates in a hamburger, these bacteria have, just like the grasses, co-evolved with the cow, whom they feed. Truly, this is an excellent system for all concerned, for the grasses, for the bacteria, for the animals, and for us, the animal eaters. When Australians engage in debate about educational quality or equity, they often seem to accept that a country cannot achieve both at the same time. The lecture will present compelling international evidence that there are countries which do, though Australia is not among them. Curriculum reforms intended to improve equity often fail to do so because they increase breadth or differentiation in offerings in a way that increases differences in quality. Further, these differences in quality often reflect differences in students' social backgrounds because the new offerings are typically taken up by relatively disadvantaged students who are not served well by them. Evidence from New South Wales will be used to illustrate this point. The need to improve the quality of education is well accepted across OECD and other countries as they seek to strengthen their human capital to underpin their modern knowledge economies. Improved equity is also important for this purpose since the demand for high-level skills is widespread and the opportunities for the low-skilled are diminishing. Improved equity in education is also important for social cohesion. There are countries in which the education system seems primarily to reproduce existing social arrangements, conferring privilege where it already exists and denying it where it does not. Even in countries where the diagnosis might be less extreme, the capacity of schooling to build social cohesion is often diminished by the way in which schools separate individuals and groups. In 1920, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution was enacted, creating yet another serious setback to the American wine industry. The National Prohibition Act, also known as the Volstead Act, prohibited the manufacture, sale, transportation, importation, exportation, delivery, or possession of intoxicating liquors for beverage purposes, and nearly destroyed what had become a thriving national industry. In 1920, there were more than 700 wineries in California. By the end of Prohibition, there were 160. If Prohibition had lasted only 4 or 5 years, its impact on the wine industry might have been negligible. But it continued for 13 years, during which time grapes went underground literally and figuratively, becoming an important commodity in the criminal economy. One loophole in the Volstead Act allowed for the manufacture and sale of sacramental wines, medicinal wines for sale by pharmacists with a doctor's prescription, and medicinal wine tonics, fortified wines, sold without a prescription. Perhaps more importantly, Prohibition allowed anyone to produce up to 200 gallons of fruit juice or cider each year. The fruit juice, which was sometimes made into concentrate, was ideal for making wine. Some of this yield found its way to bootleggers throughout America who did just that. But not for long, because the government stepped in and banned the sale of grape juice, preventing illegal wine production. Vineyards stopped being planted, and the American wine industry ground to a halt.